The wind coming off the eastern slopes of the Ural Mountains carries a specific kind of cold, a biting, dry chill that seems to penetrate not just the skin, but the very bedrock beneath the snow. Here, along the banks of the Narada River, the geology is old. It is not merely ancient in the way a Roman ruin is ancient, nor even in the way a dinosaur fossil is ancient. The strata exposed by the mining operations in this region date back to the Pleistocene, and deeper still, penetrating the veil of the Cenozoic, reaching down into layers of sediment laid down before the first mammal ever drew breath. It is a landscape of gray shale, crushed granite, and the heavy silence of deep time. In 1991, during a routine geological survey intended to prospect for gold in these alluvial deposits, excavators began to pull up samples from a depth of roughly 40 feet. The soil here is dense, compacted by the weight of millennia, a frozen archive of the planet's history. The excavators were looking for the gleam of precious metal, the telltale shimmer of placer gold that washes down from the high peaks over millions of years of erosion. What they found instead defied the fundamental chronology of human existence. Embedded within the frozen sediment were tiny, metallic artifacts. They were not jagged shards of natural nor were they the result of industrial runoff from the Soviet era. These were distinct geometric forms, nanoscopic spirals, copper coils, tungsten filaments. Some were no larger than a grain of sand, measuring a mere 3 millimeters in length. Others were microscopic, requiring heavy magnification to even discern their structure. The composition was specific: copper, rare earth metals, and molybdenum, a high melting point element used in modern missiles and filament technology. The depth at which they were found was not a matter of debate. The stratigraphic layer was undisturbed, sealed by layers of clay and permafrost that had not moved for at least 20,000 years, and potentially much, much longer. The mainstream archaeological consensus tells us that 20,000 years ago, the humans in this region were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They worked with bone, antler, flint, and perhaps rudimentary ceramics. They did not smelt tungsten. They did not draw copper into microscopic coils. They did not possess the laser-like precision required to manufacture components that mimic the internal circuitry of modern nanotechnology. And yet, the objects were there. They sat in the palm of the geologist's hand, cold, oxidized, and undeniable. This anomaly on the banks of the Narada River is not an isolated incident, but rather a whisper in a cacophony of silence. It serves as a jarring entry point into a question that science has been hesitant to ask, largely because the implications dismantle the pedestal upon which we have placed our own species. We view ourselves as the apex of terrestrial history, the inevitable result of 4 billion years of evolution, the first and only minds to shape the Earth into cities, grids, and networks. But the timeline of Earth is terrifyingly vast, and our tenure upon it is terrifyingly brief. If we compress the 4.5 billion year lifespan of this planet into a single 24-hour day, anatomically modern humans arrive only in the last 4 seconds before midnight. Recorded history, the sum total of every empire, every written word, every stone temple and glass skyscraper, occupies less than a few milliseconds. In that immense, yawning void of time before us, in the 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 56 seconds that preceded our arrival, is it scientifically sound to assume that silence implies absence? Or have we simply failed to understand how the Earth devours its own past? To understand the possibility of a pre-human industrial civilization, one must first confront the violence of planetary geology. We often speak of saving the planet, implying that the Earth is a fragile thing, easily scarred by our presence. In the short term, this is true. We have altered the atmosphere, acidified the oceans, and carpeted the continents in plastic. But on a geological timescale, the Earth is not fragile. It is a grinding, churning, self-cleaning engine of erasure. The primary mechanism of this erasure is plate tectonics. The crust of our world is not a solid shell. It is a fractured jigsaw puzzle of floating plates that are constantly colliding, separating, and sliding beneath one another. This process, known as subduction, is the ultimate destroyer of evidence. When an oceanic plate meets a continental plate, the ocean floor is driven down into the hot, viscous mantle, where it is melted back into magma. Any structure, any artifact, any city built on that crust is not just ruined, it is atomized. It is recycled into the molten blood of the earth, to eventually be spewed out of a volcano millions of years later as fresh, blank lava. Consider the ocean floor. It is the largest surface area on the planet, covering 70% of the globe. Yet, the oldest ocean floor currently in existence is only about 200 million years old. That is the Jurassic period. There is no ocean floor left from the Cambrian, the Permian, or the Triassic. It has all been subducted. If a civilization had built a global network of cities on the coastlines of the supercontinent Pangaea, or on the shores of the primal Panthalassic Ocean 300 million years ago, every single square inch of their territory has since been thrust into the mantle and melted. The evidence is not hidden. It is chemically deleted. But what of the continents? Surely the land is more stable. While it is true that continental crust is older and thicker, it is subject to the relentless attrition of erosion and weathering. Rain, wind, and ice are patient sculptors, but they are also efficient erasers. A modern skyscraper made of reinforced concrete and steel seems permanent to us. But concrete is porous. Water seeps in, freezes, and expands, cracking the stone. The steel reinforcement bars inside rust, expanding and blowing the concrete apart from the inside. Without maintenance, a modern city like New York or Tokyo would begin to crumble within 50 years. Within 500 years, the skyline would be a jagged row of stumps. Within 10,000 years, a blink of an eye in geological time, the steel would have oxidized into red dust, indistinguishable from the iron already present in the soil. The concrete would have pulverized into calcium carbonate, washing away into the rivers to become limestone sediment. The plastics we produce, the hallmark of our epoch, will eventually degrade. Even the most stubborn polymers break down under ultraviolet light and mechanical action. They become microplastics, then nanoplastics, and finally they settle into the sedimentary layer as a thin chemical signature, a layer of complex hydrocarbons that might confuse a future geologist, but would hardly look like a toaster or a smartphone. This is the great paradox of the archaeological record. We look for bones, for stone tools, for walls. But the longer a civilization persists, and the more advanced it becomes, the less stone it uses. We are moving toward a civilization of glass, silicon, and biodegradable composites. We are moving toward the cloud, digitizing our culture. If we were to vanish tomorrow, the most enduring monuments we leave behind would not be our buildings, but our open-pit mines and the isotopic scars we have left in the atmosphere. The search for a pre-human civilization, therefore, is not a search for a ruined temple in the jungle or a buried statue. It is a forensic audit of the planet's chemistry. It is a hunt for anomalies in the rock record that cannot be explained by natural processes. We must look for the ghosts of industry in the isotopes of carbon, in the concentrations of rare metals, and in the sudden, inexplicable shifts in the planet's climate that mirror our own impact. We must descend into the stratigraphic column, layer by layer, past the Holocene, past the Pleistocene, deep into the suffocating heat of the Eocene and beyond, to see if we are truly the first to burn the world. Let us turn our attention to the first major piece of evidence, a global event that occurred roughly 56 million years ago. This is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, known to climatologists as the PTM. To the untrained eye looking at a graph of Earth's temperature history, the PTM looks like a vertical wall. It was a moment of rapid, violent heating. In a geological instant, perhaps as short as a few thousand years, global temperatures spiked by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The poles became temperate. Crocodile-like reptiles swam in the waters of the Arctic Ocean. Palm trees grew in Alaska. The cause of the PTM is widely debated, but the mechanism is understood: a massive injection of carbon into the atmosphere. The volume of carbon required to trigger such a spike is astronomical, comparable to, or perhaps exceeding, the entire reserve of fossil fuels present on Earth today. The standard geological explanation involves natural disasters on an apocalyptic scale. The most common theory is the sudden destabilization of methane clathrates, frozen methane locked in the seabed, releasing a gigaton bomb of greenhouse gas. Others point to massive volcanic eruptions in the North Atlantic igneous province, tearing the Earth open and belching carbon dioxide for millennia. These natural explanations are plausible. They fit the models. But when we look closer at the isotopic signature of the carbon from that era, the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13, a strange synchronicity emerges. The rate of carbon release during the onset of the PTM is frighteningly similar to the rate of carbon release we are seeing today due to anthropogenic activity. The spike was sudden, it was drastic, and it altered the biosphere for over 100,000 years. If an industrial civilization had existed 56 million years ago, a society that burned fossil fuels to power its cities, this is exactly what their demise would look like in the rock record. Their cities would be gone, ground to dust by 50 million years of erosion. Their machines would be oxidized to nothing. Their bones would have dissolved in the acidic soils of the jungle planet they created. But the carbon they pumped into the air would remain. It would settle into the oceans, captured in the shells of microscopic foraminifera, and sink to the bottom to become limestone and chalk. We can drill into those layers today, measure the isotopes, and see the spike. The skeptic argues that this is pareidolia, seeing faces in the clouds. We see an industrial accident because we are currently living through one. They argue that volcanoes are capable of immense destruction without the need for a driving intelligence. And this is true, but the PTM is singular in its intensity and speed. It stands out against the background noise of natural climate fluctuation. It is a thermal anomaly that begs for a cause equal to its violence. Furthermore, the PTM is not just a story of heat. It is a story of biological reorganization. The fossil record shows a sudden wave of migration and evolution during this period. Mammals, previously small and marginal, suddenly diversified and spread across the globe. Primates, our own distant ancestors, appeared in abundance during this window. It was a time of chaos, of extinction and rebirth. If a high technological society had risen and fallen in the thousands of years leading up to that spike, burning the world's resources and triggering a climate collapse, they would have cleared the ecological stage for the rise of the mammals that followed. We might be the beneficiaries of their apocalypse. We must also consider the silence of the artifacts themselves, or rather, the lack thereof. If a civilization existed in the Eocene 56 million years ago, what would survive? We have to strip away our bias for stone. If they were advanced, they likely built with composites, ceramics, and alloys. Consider the geological hard drive. To save a piece of information for 50 million years, you cannot write it on paper, or carve it in limestone, or store it on a silicon chip. You must encode it in the geology itself. There are elements that do not appear naturally in high concentrations. Plutonium-244, for instance, has a half-life of 80 million years. If we were to fight a nuclear war today, or simply leak a massive amount of nuclear waste, the signature of that plutonium would be detectable in the sedimentary layer 50 million years from now. It would be a sharp, unnatural spike of a heavy element that has no business being there. Curiously, there are anomalies in the geological record that resemble this, though they are often dismissed as the result of natural nuclear reactors. The Oklo reactor in Gabon, Africa, is the most famous example. Discovered in 1972, this site contains uranium deposits that appear to have undergone self-sustaining nuclear fission around 1.7 billion years ago. The scientific consensus is that this was a freak of nature. Groundwater seeped into rich uranium, or acting as a neutron moderator and triggering a chain reaction that burned for hundreds of thousands of years. The physics of the natural reactor theory hold up. It is mathematically possible, but the conditions required are so specific, so incredibly precise, that it strains the laws of probability. The water must be exactly the right purity. The uranium concentration must be exactly the right density. The geological geometry must be perfect to prevent a meltdown that would disperse the fuel. And this happened not once, but in over a dozen reaction zones within the same mine. Is it more rational to believe that nature accidentally built a dozen nuclear reactors in a single location, managed the reaction to keep it stable for millennia, and then shut it down? Or is it worth considering that we are looking at the fossilized remains of an energy extraction site? The waste products found at Oklo, isotopes of xenon, neodymium, and ruthenium, are the same signatures we find in the spent fuel rods of our own power plants. Over nearly 2 billion years, the metal containment vessels, the concrete cooling towers, and the electrical grid would have utterly vanished. The only thing that would remain is the spent fuel itself, sitting in the rock, radiating a silent testament to a physics that was understood long before the first dinosaur evolved. The investigation shifts now from the deep time of the Oklo mines to a more recent, yet equally perplexing anomaly found within the coal seams of the world. Coal is the compressed, fossilized remains of ancient forests. Most of the coal we burn today was laid down during the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago. It is a time when the Earth was covered in vast swamp forests of giant ferns and mosses, a time before bacteria had evolved to effectively break down lignin, the tough fiber in wood. Trees fell and did not rot. They sank into the muck, creating massive layers of carbon that were eventually crushed into black rock. Because coal is sedimentary, it forms a sealed timeline. Anything dropped into the swamp 300 million years ago stays there, entombed in the pressure. Miners break open these seams every day. Usually, they find fern patterns or the fossilized tracks of amphibians. But occasionally, they find things that the standard model of history cannot accommodate. In 1912, at the municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma, a fireman was feeding coal into the furnace. He smashed a large chunk of bituminous coal with a sledgehammer to break it down. Inside the center of the coal, completely encased in the rock, was an iron pot. It was not a chaotic lump of ore. It was a manufactured vessel with a spout and a handle. The fireman, a man named Frank Kennard, signed an affidavit witnessing the discovery. The coal itself came from the Wilburton mines, from a seam dated to roughly 312 million years ago. Skeptics dismissed it immediately. They claimed the coal must have formed around the pot recently, or that the pot had been dropped into a mine shaft and become encrusted. But coal takes millions of years to form under immense pressure. You cannot simply drop an iron pot into a swamp and have it turn into anthracite coal in a few decades. The pressure required to turn peat into coal would flatten a cast iron pot like a tin can. And yet, the object reportedly kept its shape, suggesting it was strong enough to withstand the geological forces, or that it was placed there by means we do not understand. A similar impossibility surfaced in the Salzburg Cube, discovered in Austria in 1885 within a block of lignite coal. It was a strange, iron shape, machined on 4 sides, with a deep groove running around its center. The lignite layer was millions of years old. The object was analyzed and found to be artificially manufactured iron. It was held in the Salzburg Museum, a jagged piece of contradiction. Was it a meteorite? The composition didn't match. Was it a piece of mining machinery? It was found deep inside the block, not on the floor. These objects are often labeled ooparts, out-of-place artifacts. The scientific community generally ignores them, filing them away as hoaxes or misidentifications. And admittedly, many are, but not all. The statistical probability that every single anomaly is a hoax is low. We only need one to be genuine to shatter the timeline. If we entertain the notion that the iron pot or the Salzburg cube are genuine, we are forced to confront the Silurian hypothesis again. If a civilization existed during the Carboniferous period, 300 million years ago, they would have shared the world with giant insects and amphibians. The continents were in completely different positions. The atmosphere was rich in oxygen, allowing for larger biological growth. Who would they have been? Not humans. We were not even a blueprint in the DNA of the universe then. Could intelligence have arisen in a synapsid, in a giant arthropod, or perhaps in a lineage that has no modern analog, a branch of the tree of life that was pruned so completely that no fossil remains? The absence of their skeletons is not evidence of their absence. Fossilization is incredibly rare. It requires an organism to die in exactly the right conditions, buried quickly in anoxic mud. We have fossils for perhaps less than 1% of all the species that have ever lived. If a species lived in regions that were not conducive to fossilization, such as acidic forest floors or rocky highlands, they would leave no trace. If they cremated their dead or had burial practices that accelerated decomposition, their biological signature would be zero. We are left, then, with the industrial signature. If there was a Carboniferous civilization, they likely used coal. It was abundant and accessible. Perhaps the iron pot was not dropped by a visitor, but left by a resident, a relic of a mining operation conducted 300 million years before we picked up a pickaxe. The paradox implies that we are walking on the ruins of a previous world, burning the same fuel they burned, unknowingly excavating their landfills and calling it geology. This brings us to the texture of the rock itself. There are places where the stone seems to have been cut with a precision that defies the copper chisels and stone pounders of our acknowledged ancestors. We must travel to the high Andes, to the windswept plateau of Pumapunku in Bolivia. The altitude here is punishing, the air thin and cold. Scattered across the plain are massive blocks of diorite and andesite, stones so hard they are used to grind other stones. The mainstream timeline places the construction of Pumapunku around 1500 years ago, attributed to the Tiwanaku culture. But the stonework creates a dissonance with the tools attributed to them. The blocks are not merely shaped, they are machined. They feature perfectly drilled holes, consistent in depth and diameter. There are complex, interlocking geometries that resemble circuit boards or modular prefabs. The cuts are straight, sharp, and polished to a glass-like smoothness. Run your finger along the inside of a drill hole in the H-blocks of Pumapunku. It does not feel like the work of a hand-turned copper tube and abrasive sand. It feels uniform. It feels industrial. To achieve this level of precision with primitive tools requires a lifetime of labor for a single block. Yet there are hundreds. Some weigh over 100 tons. The skeptic argues that we underestimate the ingenuity of the ancients. They say that time and sand can achieve anything. This is the infinite monkey theorem applied to masonry. Give enough humans enough time, and they will produce a perfect right angle. But geology offers a rebuttal. The weathering on these stones is profound. Some geologists who have inspected the site argue that the erosion patterns suggest the blocks have been exposed to the elements for far longer than 1500 years. They speak of water weathering in a desert that has been dry for millennia. They speak of a cataclysm that tossed 100-ton blocks like toys, shattering the complex into the chaotic puzzle we see today. If Pumapunku is 15,000 years old or 50,000, it changes the narrative. It places the site in the deep Pleistocene, before the ice sheets retreated. It implies a civilization that possessed a technology of stone cutting that we cannot replicate today without diamond-tipped saws and CNC machines. And then silence. They vanished. Did the ice take them? Did the Younger Dryas impact event, a proposed comet strike 12,800 years ago, wipe them from the face of the earth, leaving only these imperishable blocks? The stones of Pumapunku are magnetic. Not all of them, but specific ones. When a compass is brought near, the needle swings wildly. Was this intentional? A function of the structure? Or simply a coincidence of the geology? The tactility of the mystery is what haunts the visitor. You can touch the evidence of the impossible. It is cold, gray, and indifferent to your confusion. We must dig deeper, past the stone, past the coal, to the very structure of the Earth's crust. We look now for the scars of resource extraction on a planetary scale. Modern humanity has moved gigatons of Earth. We have leveled mountains for copper and turned islands inside out for phosphate. But nature is a chaotic architect. It builds mountains through collision and carves valleys through erosion. It rarely creates straight lines. It rarely creates perfectly circular features. Off the coast of Florida and in the Caribbean, there are underwater formations that tease the line between geology and architecture. The Bimini Road, a formation of limestone blocks that look like a paved street, is dismissed as natural beach rock fracturing. But scan the ocean floor with side-scan sonar, and you begin to see patterns that are harder to explain. Vast, rectilinear features, seamounts that look like pyramids. But the most compelling argument for ancient extraction lies in the rarity of certain elements. Gold, for example, is a heavy element. When the Earth was molten, most of the gold sank to the core. The gold we find in the crust today is largely the result of asteroid bombardment that happened later. It should be relatively evenly distributed in certain geological zones. Yet, there are ancient mines in southern Africa, dating back tens of thousands of years, where humanity has been obsessed with gold extraction since the dawn of our consciousness. Why gold? It is too soft for tools. It is useless for weapons. It is aesthetically pleasing, yes, but ancient cultures valued it above survival, above food. Some theories propose that the easily accessible veins of surface metals, high-grade copper, pure veins of tin, were already gone before we started mining. We assume we are tapping the Earth's first bounty. But what if we are mining the scraps? What if the easy oil, the easy coal, and the surface metals were harvested millions of years ago, and we are forced to dig deep because the surface was picked clean? This is the concept of the low-hanging fruit. A civilization that evolves on a virgin planet finds massive nuggets of copper sitting in riverbeds. They find oil bubbling to the surface. They find iron ore in massive mountains. If a civilization existed before us, they would have taken this. The fact that we found some surface metals suggests either they didn't exist or they were very selective or, and this is the most sobering thought, enough time has passed, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, that the geological cycle has refreshed the surface supply through volcanism and uplift. The Earth restocked the shelves, but the reboot takes time. 10 million years, 50 million years. If a civilization rose and fell every 50 million years, the Earth could theoretically support them all, erasing the traces of the predecessor before the successor arrives. We could be the fifth or sixth iteration of high intelligence on this sphere, separated by gulfs of time so vast that they function as alien worlds. Let us return to the atmosphere, the most volatile layer of our geological onion. We look for the technosignature. In our search for extraterrestrial intelligence, we scan the stars for industrial pollutants, CFCs, complex synthetics that nature does not produce. If we turn that telescope back on Earth's history, do we see them? The challenge is that complex molecules break down. but their elemental constituents do not. We mentioned the carbon-13 spike of the PETM. There are other spikes. At the boundary of the Triassic and Jurassic, another extinction event, another massive fluctuation in carbon. At the end of the Permian, the Great Dying, 95% of all life perished. The ocean turned anoxic. The air was poisoned. We blame Siberian traps volcanoes, but the efficiency of the killing is suspicious. It was a total biosphere collapse. If a civilization had reached a point of runaway greenhouse, where they lost control of their climate technology or their pollution, the Permian extinction is exactly what the aftermath looks like. A sterilized world, taking 10 million years to recover its diversity. The gap in the fossil record after the Permian is called the coal gap. For millions of years, no coal was formed because there were no forests. The world was a fungal wasteland. Imagine a civilization facing this. They see the end coming. They cannot stop the warming. They cannot stop the ocean acidification. What do? They might try to leave. This brings us to the most speculative, yet scientifically grounded aspect of the investigation: the orbital graveyard. If a prior species achieved spaceflight, they would have left artifacts not just on Earth, but in the solar system. Earth is a corrosive environment. Wind, rain, tectonics. But the moon? The moon is a museum. There is no wind. There is no rain. A footprint left on the moon lasts for millions of years. A piece of machinery left in a stable orbit or on the surface of a Lagrange point asteroid would remain indefinitely. We have begun to map the moon in high resolution, but we have hardly scratched the surface. There are anomalies in the lunar craters, flashes of light, transient lunar phenomena, TLP, that have been observed for centuries. Are these outgassing events? Or are they the glint of sunlight on ancient metallic debris? If a probe from a Silurian civilization landed on the moon 100 million years ago, it would still be there, covered perhaps in a thin layer of regolith dust, but structurally intact. The search for artifacts on Earth is a fight against entropy. The search for artifacts in space is a fight against vastness. But if we are to find the smoking gun, it will likely not be in the mud of the Narada River, but in the silence of the Tycho crater. However, we must ground ourselves back in the terrestrial rock. We must consider the biological argument. The brain is an expensive organ. It consumes 20% of the body's energy. Evolution is a miser. It does not select for traits that are wasteful. High intelligence is only selected for if it provides a massive survival advantage. We assume that intelligence is a linear progression, that life gets smarter over time. But evolution is not a ladder. It is a branching bush. Dinosaurs ruled for 160 million years. Truden, a small, bird-like dinosaur from the late Cretaceous, had a large brain-to-body ratio. It had binocular vision. It had grasping hands. If the asteroid had not struck 66 million years ago, could the Truden lineage have evolved into a tool-using, city-building species? Some paleontologists speculate they might have been on that path. Now, imagine a civilization of reptilian descent. They would not build like us. They might not need clothes. They might prefer heat. Their cities might be built in the equatorial zones, the very zones that are most prone to rapid vegetation overgrowth and decay. A city built of wood and organic resins in a tropical rainforest would disappear in 1,000 years. If they achieved a high level of biotechnology rather than heavy industry, manipulating trees to grow into houses, using bioluminescence for light, their footprint would be entirely biodegradable. They would leave no wire, no concrete, no plastic. Only a strange spike in the pollen count, a manipulation of the genetic record of the plants that surrounded them. We look for hard technology because that is what we use. We look for metal and stone. We are biased by our own reflection. A soft civilization, one that integrated perfectly with the biosphere, would be invisible to us. They would be the ultimate ghosts. They could have lived for 1,000,000 years, reached a state of philosophy and art that dwarfs our own, and left nothing but a slightly unusual distribution of fruit trees in the fossil record. This leads to the climax, the unifying theory of cyclical history. The rebuttal to the standard model is this: the sample size of 1 is scientifically, statistically insignificant. We have one example of high intelligence, us. To assume we are the only instance in 4.5 billion years is an assumption of exceptionalism that has been proven wrong in every other field. We thought the Earth was the center of the universe. It wasn't. We thought the Sun was unique. It's a standard star. We thought our galaxy was the only one. There are billions. Why would intelligence be the exception? The unifying theory suggests that intelligence is a recurring property of the Earth system, much like an ice age or a magnetic pole reversal. It suggests that when the conditions are right, high oxygen, stable climate, abundant biodiversity, the planet generates a mind. This mind builds, expands, consumes, and eventually either destroys itself or is destroyed by the planet's natural volatility. The Earth then hits the reset button. The carbon is scrubbed from the air over millions of years. The cities are ground into sand. The isotopes decay. The biosphere recovers wild and feral, forgetting the masters that came before. And then, slowly, the cycle begins again. A new species discovers fire. A new species discovers the wheel. A new species digs up the coal formed by the forests of the deep past, burning it, unaware that they are burning the fossilized future of their predecessors. This theory transforms the Earth from a passive stage into an active cyclical organism. It implies that we are not the owners of this house. We are merely the current tenants, and like all tenants, we will eventually be evicted. The so what of this narrative is profound. If the Silurian hypothesis is true, or even partially true, it serves as a dark mirror for our own civilization. We are currently obsessed with leaving a legacy. We build monuments, we launch golden records into space, we write books. We scream into the void. We were here, but the geology tells us that the Earth does not care. The Earth is a machine that manufactures oblivion. If we want to survive longer than the average civilization, if we want to break the cycle of rise and ruin, we cannot behave like a fire that burns itself out. We must become something else. We must stop fighting the planet and start acting like a part of its immune system rather than a pathogen. The artifacts in the Urals, the isotope spikes in the limestone, the impossible precision of the Andean stones, they are memento mori. They are warnings etched in the only medium that lasts, the planet itself. They tell us that greatness is fleeting, that industry is fragile, and that the higher we build, the harder the fall. As you stand on the edge of a modern open-pit mine, looking down at the spiral roads cut into the earth, watching the massive trucks haul or from the deep dark, remember the nano-coils of the Narada River. Remember that we are digging in a graveyard. The layers of rock beneath our feet are not just mud and stone. They are the compressed pages of a history book that has been glued shut. We have to ask ourselves, when the next species arises, 50 million years from now, after the ice has come and gone, after the oceans have rearranged the map, what will they find of us? Will they find the Statue of Liberty? No, it will be dust. Will they find the internet? No, it will be gone. They will find a layer of plastic, a layer of radioactive isotopes, and perhaps if they look very, very closely at the strata of the Anthropocene, they will find a sudden, sharp spike in carbon, a fever that broke the world for a while. And they will wonder, just as we wonder, if anyone was really there, or if it was just another bad dream of the geology. The wind continues to blow over the Ural Mountains. The snow covers the excavation site. The evidence is buried once more. The earth keeps its secrets well. But now you know where to look. You know that the silence is not empty. It is full of ghosts, and they are waiting for us to notice them. We leave the frozen banks of the Narada River and the microscopic enigmas of the Urals, traveling southeast, crossing the vast, arid expanse of the Eurasian continent. We ascend into the thin, biting air of the Qing-Hyderabad Plateau. This is a landscape that feels less like Earth and more like the surface of Mars. It is a place of high-altitude deserts, salt lakes, and silence that rings in the ears. Here, in the Qaidam Basin, stands Mount Baigong. To the local inhabitants, this mountain has always been a place of suspicion. It is not a majestic peak of granite and snow. It is a strange pyramidal protrusion rising from the desolation. At its foot lie 3 caves, triangular entrances carved into the sandstone, looking for all the world like eyes staring blindly across the salt flats of Tosan Lake. In 2002, a team of scientists ventured into these caves, drawn by rumors of alien ruins. What they found was not a crashed saucer, but something geologically disturbing. Embedded in the rock walls of the cave and scattered across the lakebed nearby were pipes, hundreds of them. These were not surface artifacts. They ran deep into the mountain, piercing the sedimentary rock like veins. They ranged in diameter from the thickness of a toothpick to nearly half a meter wide. They were composed of a rusty, metallic red substance. When the team analyzed the composition, they found it was primarily ferric oxide, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide. But there was a gap. Nearly 8% of the material could not be identified. The elements were fused in a way that suggested intense heat, a process of manufacturing rather than natural sedimentation. The mainstream explanation arrived quickly, as it always does, to patch the hole in the timeline. The skeptics, and indeed many geologists, identified these pipes as fossilized tree roots. The scientific term is a rhizolith. The theory suggests that millions of years ago, this basin was a lush forest. Trees grew on the banks of a prehistoric lake. When they died, sediment covered their roots. Over eons, organic matter decayed and was replaced by minerals, pyrite or iron-rich magma, preserving the shape of the root in stone. It is a well-documented geological process. We see it in the petrified forest of Arizona. We see it in coal seams. But the devil, as always, is in the details of the deep time. First, we must look at the age. The sediment in which these pipes are encased dates back approximately 150,000 years. In the geological timeline, this is the Pleistocene. But the dating of the organic material found within the pipes, the scraps of carbon that remained, yielded a different date. The thermoluminescence dating indicated the pipes were formed under extreme heat, suggesting a thermal event that fused the iron and sand. The tree root theory begins to fracture when one considers the geography. 150,000 years ago, the Qaidam Basin was not a lush tropical forest. Paleoclimatological data suggests it was already an arid, high-altitude environment. While it was wetter than today, the soil composition was harsh, alkaline, and hostile to the kind of massive, deep-rooting hardwood trees required to create pipes of this diameter. Furthermore, tree roots branch. They taper, they twist and turn in search of water. The Baigong pipes are remarkably straight. Some of them run for hundreds of feet without tapering. They penetrate the mountain horizontally, and others rise vertically from the lake bed. A root system does not grow in perfect, straight industrial lines. It does not bore through solid sandstone in a uniform cylinder. And then there is the radiation. When researchers brought Geiger counters into the caves of Mount Baigong, the needles jumped. The pipes are radioactive, not dangerously so, but significantly higher than the background radiation of the surrounding rock. Why would a fossilized tree root concentrate radioactive isotopes? If we view this through the lens of the Silurian Hypothesis, The bygone pipes stop looking like roots and start looking like infrastructure. Consider a geothermal plant or a water desalination facility. In a high-altitude desert, water is life. A civilization operating in this region would need to pump water from the salt lake, filter it, and transport it into the mountain, perhaps for cooling, perhaps for hydroponics, perhaps for processing, or over 150,000 years, the steel of the pipes would oxidize. The iron would leach into the surrounding sandstone, creating a hard, rusty shell. The interior would fill with silica-rich sand. The machinery would rot away. The pumps would vanish. The building that housed the intake valves would erode into dust. All that would remain is the shadow of the plumbing, the hardened arteries of a system that once kept a colony alive in the wasteland. The timeline is provocative. 150,000 years ago is right at the dawn of Homo sapiens. We were just beginning to leave Africa. We were scratching at the dirt with sticks. If another intelligence was here, pumping water in the Qinghai province, we would never have met them. We were ghosts to each other, separated by continents and capacity. This brings us to a terrifying realization about the durability of our own world. Look at the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. It is a marvel of engineering, snaking across the tundra. If humans vanished today, what would happen to it? In 1,000 years, the supports would collapse. In 10,000 years, the steel would rust and be buried by the shifting permafrost. In 100,000 years, a future geologist might dig a trench and find a long, oxidized cylinder of iron-rich earth running in a straight line for hundreds of miles. They might call it a geological anomaly. They might call it a magma injection. They would likely not call it an oil pipeline, because the concept of pumping liquid poison across a frozen continent would seem absurd to a society that had not invented the internal combustion engine. We are blind to the function of these ancient objects because we assume nature is the only architect. But nature rarely draws straight lines, and nature almost never smelts iron to 8% purity of unknown composition. The impossible maps, geography before the ice. We must now shift our gaze from the land to the shape of the world itself. We travel not in space, but in perspective. We look at the maps. Cartography is the science of empire. You cannot rule what you cannot measure. The history of human mapmaking is a slow, clumsy progression from vague sketches to satellite precision. We are taught that the ancient Greeks knew the world was round, but their maps were distorted. We are taught that the age of discovery in the 15th century was the first time humanity truly understood the coastlines of the Americas and the Pacific. But there are documents sitting in dusty archives that mock this narrative. The most famous and the most unsettling is the Piri Reis map. Drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, the map was discovered in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul in 1929. It is drawn on gazelle skin. Piri Reis himself noted in the margins that this was not an original work. He was a compiler. He admitted to using 20 older source maps, including charts from the time of Alexander the Great and, allegedly, maps rescued from the burning library of Alexandria. The map shows the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America with surprising accuracy for the 16th century. It places the Amazon River correctly. It shows the Falkland Islands, but the true shock lies at the bottom of the parchment. Connecting to the tip of South America, the map shows a coastline running eastward. It depicts bays, inlets, mountains, and rivers. This landmass corresponds perfectly to the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica. Here is the paradox. Antarctica was not discovered by modern history until 1820. It is the most isolated, hostile continent on Earth. In 1513, no European ship had ever sailed that far south. The waters are choked with pack ice. The seas are the roughest in the world. But the impossibility deepens. The coastline depicted on the Piri Reis map does not match the coastline of Antarctica as we see it today. Today, the coastline is ice. Shelf ice extends miles out into the ocean, masking the true shape of the land beneath. The Piri Reis map shows the land. It shows the coast as it exists under the ice. The last time Queen Maud Land was free of ice was at least 6,000 years ago. Some climatological models push that date back much further, to the last interglacial period, over 100,000 years ago. This implies that the source maps Piri Reis used, the ancient charts he copied from the Greeks, who copied them from the Egyptians, who copied them from whom, were drawn when Antarctica was a habitable temperate continent. The skeptic argues that this is a coincidence. They say the mapmaker simply ran out of paper and bent the coastline of South America to fit the skin. They argue that the mountains are just artistic flourishes. They claim the Antarctica is actually a distorted version of Patagonia. But the Piri Reis map is not alone. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531 shows the entire continent of Antarctica with no ice cap. It shows mountain ranges. It shows rivers flowing from the interior to the sea. In 1949, the U.S. Air Force conducted a seismic survey of Antarctica, using sonar to map the topography beneath the mile-thick ice sheet. When they compared their seismic data to the Orontius Phineas map, the match was chilling. The ancient map correctly located mountain ranges that are currently buried under thousands of feet of solid ice. It showed rivers where the modern glaciers now flow. How do you map a mountain range that is buried under ice? You cannot do it with a sextant. You cannot do it with a compass. You can only do it if the ice isn't there. This forces us to confront a timeline that makes no sense in the standard model. If the ice covered Antarctica millions of years ago, as geology tells us, then who mapped it before the freeze? Was there a civilization that possessed the maritime capability to circumnavigate the globe, the mathematical knowledge to calculate longitude, a feat we didn't master until the 18th century, and the surveying tools to map a continent with aerial precision, all occurring during a warm period in the deep past? The accuracy of longitude on these ancient portolan charts is perhaps the most damning evidence of lost technology. Determining latitude is easy. You measure the angle of the sun or stars. Determining longitude requires time. You need a clock that stays accurate on a rolling ship, thousands of miles from home. You need the chronometer. We didn't invent a reliable one until the 1760s. Yet, the Piri Reis map, and others like the Dulcert Portolan of 1339, exhibit accurate longitudinal coordinates between Africa and South America. This is a mathematical impossibility for the time they were drawn. It is akin to finding a diagram of a jet engine in a Leonardo da Vinci sketchbook. Not a sketch, but a working blueprint. The implication is that the maps are fragments of a global database, a Google Earth of the prehistoric world. The knowledge didn't evolve. It decayed. The ancient Greeks didn't invent geography. They inherited the scraps of it. They copied charts they didn't understand, tracing coastlines that had long since frozen over, preserving the memory of a world that was open, green, and interconnected. If a maritime civilization existed 100,000 years ago, or even further back, their ports would be gone. The rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, the Meltwater Pulse 1A, which raised the oceans by 400 feet, would have drowned every coastal city on the planet. The continental shelves, now underwater, were the bread baskets of the ancient world. We are looking for ruins on the mountaintops, but the truth is likely 400 feet underwater, covered in silt and coral. The maps are the only testimony that the land was once different. They are a message in a bottle, floating through time, telling us, we were here, we sailed these waters. We knew the shape of the world before the cold took it. The nuclear shadow, the glass of the desert. We move now from the ice of the Antarctic to the furnace of the desert. We go to the Libyan desert, to the Great Sand Sea near the border of Egypt. Here, scattered across hundreds of square miles of shifting dunes, lies a beautiful, deadly enigma. It is called Libyan desert glass. It is arguably the purest natural silica glass on Earth. It is yellow-green, translucent, and gem-like. The ancient Egyptians knew of it. They carved a scarab from it that sits in the center of King Tutankhamun's pectoral breastplate. For decades, geologists assumed it was the result of a meteorite impact. A massive rock from space hits the sand. The kinetic energy melts the silica, and it splashes out to form glass. It is a violent, natural process. We see it at atomic test sites. At the Trinity site in New Mexico, where the first nuclear bomb was detonated, the desert sand was turned into a green glass called trinitite. The problem with the Libyan desert glass is the lack of a crater. To produce the sheer volume of glass found in this region, hundreds of tons of it spread over a vast area, the impact would have to be enormous. It would have left a scar on the Earth visible from orbit. But there is no crater. The satellite imagery shows nothing but undisturbed bedrock beneath the sand. The alternative theory is an airburst. A meteor entered the atmosphere and exploded before it hit the ground, like the Tunguska event in 1908. The thermal radiation from the fireball was so intense that it melted the desert floor without digging a hole. But the physics of an airburst are tricky. To melt sand into pure glass requires temperatures exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. And it needs to sustain that temperature. A fireball passes quickly. To create the purity of the Libyan glass, the heat had to be uniform and intense. When we analyze the chemical composition of the glass, we find traces of iridium, the hallmark of extraterrestrial material. This supports the meteor theory. But we also find something else: high-temperature mineralomorphs. Zircon breaks down into rhyodite only under extreme shock pressure and heat. Now, let us place the ancient war hypothesis on the table, however uncomfortable it may be. If a civilization in the deep past possessed high-energy weaponry, nuclear, plasma, or something we don't have a name for, and they used it, what would be left? A nuclear explosion creates a fireball that melts the Earth, creates glass. It spreads radioactive isotopes. It leaves no crater if detonated at the optimal airburst altitude for maximum destruction of surface structures. The Hindu texts, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, speak of weapons that sound terrifyingly modern. They describe the Agneya weapon, a blazing missile that possessed the brightness of 1,000 suns. They describe an iron thunderbolt that reduced the bodies of the enemy to ashes, made the birds turn white, and caused the hair and nails of the survivors to fall out. They speak of food becoming poisoned. This is a clinically accurate description of acute radiation sickness. Are these just poetic metaphors for arrows and fire? Or are they the cultural memory of a trauma so great it was encoded into the mythology? If a war was fought with directed energy weapons or tactical nukes 50,000 years ago, the cities would be vaporized. The metal would melt. The only thing that would remain is the scar on the geology. The glass in the desert, the vitrified forts of Scotland, stone walls melted together by heat so intense it defies the technology of the Iron Age. In Scotland, there are dozens of these forts. The stones are fused into black glass. To achieve this, you need to maintain a temperature of over 1,000 degrees for hours. A wood fire cannot do this. You can pile logs against a stone wall for a week, and it will not vitrify. You need a furnace. You need a focused heat source. Archaeologists suggest ritual destruction. They say the ancients deliberately destroyed their own forts with massive, impossible fires. But why and how? The energy budget required to melt a stone fort is astronomical. It implies a technology of heat generation that is completely absent from the archaeological record. Unless the heat came from above, unless the vitrification is the result of a weapon that turned the stone to soup in an instant. The silence of the glass is profound. It is a material that shouldn't be there, formed by a heat that shouldn't have existed, in a time when we were supposed to be striking flint together to make a spark. The biological paradox. The DNA of the gods. The investigation has looked at the rocks, the maps, and the isotopes. Now we must look inward. We must look at the code that builds us. The human genome is a 3 billion-letter instruction manual. For decades, geneticists have been puzzled by the fact that a vast percentage of our DNA, up to 98%, does not code for proteins. It was dismissively called junk DNA. But as our understanding of genetics deepens, we are realizing that junk is a misnomer. This non-coding DNA is regulatory. It controls when and how genes are turned on and off. It is the operating system. And within this operating system, there are artifacts. There are sequences that look like viruses, endogenous retroviruses, ancient viral infections that inserted their code into our ancestors' germline and were passed down, frozen in time. But there is a specific anomaly in the human timeline. Roughly 200,000 years ago, the human brain exploded in size. In a geological heartbeat, we went from clever apes to artists, engineers, and philosophers. The cranial capacity doubled. The structure of the neocortex rewired itself. Evolution usually works slowly. It is a game of inches. The sudden acceleration of human intelligence is known as the encephalization enigma. Why did nature select for a brain that was so energetically expensive? A big brain is a liability in the wild. It requires massive amounts of calories. It makes childbirth dangerous, even fatal, because the infant's head is too large for the pelvis. It makes the infant helpless for years. From a Darwinian survival standpoint, high intelligence is a risky bet. And yet, it happened. One controversial theory, skirting the edge of the Silurian Hypothesis, suggests that this upgrade was not entirely natural. Or rather, that natural includes the intervention of a prior intelligence. If a civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago, and they were masters of biotechnology, did they leave their mark not in stone, but in life? Did they cultivate the biosphere? Did they tweak the genome of the hominids, perhaps as a labor force, perhaps as an experiment, or perhaps simply to preserve a spark of consciousness before they themselves went extinct? We share 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees, but that 1% difference builds spaceships. That 1% contains a density of accelerated mutation that is hard to explain by random drift alone. There are human-accelerated regions, HARs, in our genome segments of DNA that stayed stable in mammals for millions of years, and then suddenly, in humans, mutated wildly and rapidly. What triggered the HARs? Was it a blast of cosmic radiation? A dietary shift? Or was it a splice? A deliberate editing of the code to unlock the potential of the primate brain? We are searching for a monolith on the moon, a black slab that teaches us how to use tools. But the monolith might be inside us. The uplift might be encoded in the very proteins that allow us to ask the question. If the Earth has a cycle of high civilizations, perhaps the seed of intelligence is preserved in the biological record. When the environment recovers from the last cataclysm, the genetic time bombs go off. The brain expands. The hands find the stone. The cycle begins again. We are not just the observers of the mystery. We are the result of it. Climax. The great filter is behind US and ahead of US. We have gathered the shards, the nanospirals of the Urals, the impossible isotopes of the Oklo reactor, the precision of the Puma Punku stones, the map of an ice-free Antarctica, the vitrified glass of the deserts, and the sudden, explosive growth of the human mind. The skeptics are right about one thing. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And each of these anomalies, taken in isolation, can be explained away. The spirals are industrial contamination. The reactor is a freak of nature. The map is a lucky guess. The glass is a meteorite. But when you overlay them, when you stack the transparencies of these anomalies on top of the geological timeline, a pattern emerges. It is the pattern of a pulse. The unifying theory is not one of aliens descending from the sky. It is one of a lonely planet that wakes up, dreams, and goes back to sleep. Imagine the Earth as a battery. It slowly stores solar energy in the form of carbon, forests, algae, life. It builds a charge over millions of years. Eventually, the energy density becomes high enough to support a high-energy civilization. A species arises, taps the battery. It burns the carbon. It splits the atom. It builds a global network. For a brief window, perhaps only a few thousand years, the planet glows with the light of intelligence. Satellites streak the sky. Cities shine at night. The atmosphere spikes with complexity. But a closed system cannot sustain exponential growth forever. The civilization hits a wall. Resource depletion. Climate destabilization. The great filter. They collapse. It is not always a total extinction, but the complexity falls apart. The grid goes down. The knowledge is lost. The survivors, few and scattered, return to the stone. They tell stories of the gods who flew in chariots of fire, who wielded thunderbolts, who built mountains. The earth, wounded, begins to heal. The jungle swallows the cities of glass and steel. The oceans rise and cover the ports. The tectonic plates grind the continents, subducting the evidence into the mantle. The carbon settles. The battery begins to recharge. 10 million years pass. 50 million. The slate is wiped clean. The only traces left are the deepest scars, the isotopes, the weird concentrations of metal, the fossils of a sudden mass extinction. And then it happens again. We are not the first. We are simply the current. We are the latest flame to ignite on the matchstick. This realization is terrifying, but it is also liberating. It answers the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? Why is the universe silent? Maybe they are not out there. Maybe they were right here. Maybe the reason we don't hear other civilizations is that high-energy technological societies are fleeting. They are flashes in the dark. We are currently standing at the precipice that destroyed our predecessors. We see the carbon spiking. We see the species dying. We are revving the engine of the planet into the red zone. The so what of the Silurian Hypothesis is a call to humility. It demands that we look at our skyscrapers not as permanent triumphs, but as temporary arrangements of sand and iron. It demands that we treat the earth not as a resource to be plundered, but as a host that has a very strong immune system. If we want to break the cycle, if we want to be the first civilization to survive the bottleneck, we have to change the way we interact with deep time. We have to stop building for the next quarter and start building for the next geologic epoch. We need to encode our knowledge in something more durable than paper or servers. We need to engrave our warnings in the DNA of the biosphere. We need to become a civilization that doesn't just burn the battery, but recharges it. Because if we don't, if we continue to accelerate toward the cliff, the earth will simply shrug. It will wash us away with a rise of the oceans. It will bury our plastic toys in a layer of black shale. And it will wait. It has all the time in the universe. It will wait for the rats or the squid or the cockroaches to evolve, to discover fire, to look at the moon, and to wonder if they are alone. And in the silence of the deep rock, the nano-coils of the Urals, the radioactive glass of the desert, and the plastic layer of the Anthropocene will be the only answer they get. We were here. We burned. We fell. Do better. But the investigation cannot end at the shoreline. To stop at the water's edge is to ignore 70% of the crime scene. If we accept the premise that human civilization, or any civilization, thrives on the coast, nestled by the mouths of great rivers and the ease of maritime trade, then we must accept that the majority of our history is currently under 300 feet of salt water. The ocean is the ultimate keeper of secrets. It is anoxic, cold, and pressurized. Preserves, but it also hides. The sonar maps we have of the ocean floor are, in many places, less detailed than the maps we have of Mars. We are looking at the blue marble from a distance, assuming that the flat blue expanse is empty. But when we lower the cameras, when we scrape the silt from the continental shelves, the shapes of the deep begin to emerge. In the Gulf of Khumbat, off the western coast of India, the ocean is murky. The currents are treacherous, churning up the sediment of the Nirmada River. For thousands of years, local fishermen have whispered stories of a great city that was swallowed by the sea. They spoke of Dvarka, the golden city of Krishna, a metropolis of impossible wealth and advanced architecture that sank in a single day. Myth, we said. Folklore. A story to explain the storms. In 2001, scientists from the National Institute of Ocean Technology were conducting pollution studies in the Gulf. They were not looking for gods. They were looking for garbage. Their sonar swept the seabed, expecting the chaotic noise of rocks and sand. Instead, the return signal showed geometry, regular patterns, squares, rectangles, grids. They lowered the dredges. They pulled up artifacts from a depth of 120 feet. They found wood. They found pottery. They found semi-precious stones with holes bored through them. But the wood was the key. A piece of carbonized wood, dredged from the heart of this underwater complex, was sent to 2 separate labs for carbon dating. The results were consistent, and they were devastating to the standard model. The wood was 9,500 years old. Let that number sink in. 9,500 years ago. According to our history books, the great civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt were still 5,000 years in the future. Humans were supposed to be scattered tribes, living in mud huts, just barely figuring out agriculture. They were not supposed to be building massive stone cities with planned streets, drainage systems, and citadels 5 miles long. The scale of the Gulf of Khumbat discovery is staggering. The acoustic images reveal a city 5 miles in length and 2 miles in width. That is the size of Manhattan. If the city existed 9,500 years ago, it implies that the roots of civilization go back twice as far as we thought. And if they were building on that scale, then how long did it take them to get there? You don't build a Manhattan overnight. It takes thousands of years of social evolution, engineering refinement, and economic complexity to reach that density. The skeptics argue that the wood might have drifted there from elsewhere. They argue the sonar images are just rocks interpreted by wishful thinking. But then we look to the west. We look to the waters off the coast of Cuba. In 2001, a team led by marine engineer Paulina Zalitsky was exploring the Yucatan Channel. They were searching for sunken Spanish galleons, looking for gold. Their side-scan sonar picked up anomalies on a plateau deep underwater, over 2,000 feet down. The images were crisp. They showed symmetrical stone structures, pyramids, rectangular buildings, roads. The structures were massive, composed of blocks that appeared to be cut and fitted. The geometry was orthogonal. Nature does not build city blocks at right angles 2,000 feet under the sea. Geologists immediately pushed back. They said the depth was impossible. Sea levels have fluctuated, yes, but they haven't been 2,000 feet lower in hundreds of thousands of years. If this was a city, it would have had to be built when the land was dry. That pushes the timeline back not just into the Ice Age, but into the deep geologic past. perhaps 500,000 years ago. Or it implies a tectonic event of cataclysmic proportions, a sudden subsidence where the entire island shelf collapsed into the trench, a violence that would have generated tsunamis the size of mountains, wiping out everything in the hemisphere. Zalitsky returned with a remote-operated vehicle, ROV. The footage is grainy, but it shows light-colored stone blocks, some standing, some toppled. They are devoid of marine growth in a way that suggests a strange chemical composition, or perhaps just the crushing isolation of the depth. The mainstream scientific community went silent. No major expedition has returned to verify the findings. It is too deep, too expensive, and perhaps too dangerous to the established narrative. The silence of the Cuban waters is mirrored in the Pacific, off the coast of Japan. The Yonaguni Monument. Here, the mystery is tactile. You can swim to it. It sits in shallow water, a massive sandstone formation that looks like a stepped pyramid or a ziggurat. It has sharp edges. It has flat terraces. It has what appears to be a drainage channel carved around the massive platform. It has two pillars standing at the entrance to a loop road. Geologist Robert Schoch, famously skeptical of many alternative theories, dived at Yonaguni. He argued that it was primarily natural, that the bedding planes of the sandstone fracture in straight lines. He pointed to nature's geometry, and he is right. Nature can make squares, but can nature make a staircase with equal riser heights? Can nature carve two distinct circular holes side by side in the rock, as if to hold a pillar? Can nature create a stylized face carved into the stone, gazing out at the empty ocean? If Yonaguni is artificial, it dates to the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, when that land was above water. It connects to the Jaman culture of Japan, the oldest pottery makers in the world. But the Jaman were hunter-gatherers. They were not supposed to be moving thousands of tons of rock into pyramidal platforms. The pattern of the drowned world is consistent. Massive megalithic architecture found at depths that correspond to the sea levels of the Ice Age. This is not a coincidence. This is a global footprint. It suggests that the first civilization was a maritime culture. They lived on the coasts. They used the oceans as highways. And when the ice melted, when the great glaciers of North America and Europe collapsed into the sea 12,000 years ago, their world drowned. The flood myth is universal. It is found in the Bible, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Hindu Vedas, in the Mayan Popol Vuh, in the oral traditions of the Native Americans. Academics call it a shared psychological archetype. They say early humans lived near rivers that flooded, so they all invented stories about water. But geology offers a different interpretation. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests that a comet fragment hit the North American ice sheet around 12,800 years ago. The heat vaporized the ice instantly. A wall of water, a literal freshwater tsunami, poured into the Atlantic and the Pacific. Sea levels rose not by inches, but by meters in weeks. For a civilization living on the coast, this was the end of the world. The water didn't just rise. It surged. It swallowed the ports, the cities, the libraries. The survivors were the ones living in the highlands. The primitive hill tribes who watched the golden cities of the coast disappear beneath the waves. They carried the memory of the catastrophe for 10,000 years, turning history into myth. Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, these are not fables. They are the names of the refugees. The stone that sings. Acoustic engineering. If we strip away our bias that advanced technology must look like an iPhone or a combustion engine, we can begin to see a different path of technological evolution. What if the ancients mastered a physics we have neglected? What if they mastered sound? We enter the Hypogeum of Halsaflini in Malta. It is an underground temple, carved from solid limestone around 6,000 years ago. It is a labyrinth of chambers, halls, and sanctums reaching 3 levels deep into the earth. The acoustics in the hypogeum are anomalous. Standing in the oracle chamber, a male voice chanting at a frequency of 110 Hz triggers a profound resonance. The sound does not just echo, it amplifies. It creates a standing wave that physically vibrates the body of anyone standing in the room. Neuroscience tells us that 110 Hz affects the human brain. It switches the prefrontal cortex off and deactivates the language center, while stimulating the parts of the brain associated with mood, empathy, and social behavior. It induces a trance state. Did the builders of the hypogeum accidentally carve a room with perfect psychoacoustic properties? Or was this a machine? A machine made of stone, designed to alter consciousness through sonic resonance? We see this acoustic obsession in the Great Pyramid of Giza. We are told it is a tomb, but no mummy was ever found. No hieroglyphs were inscribed on the walls. It is a massive granite-lined chamber. The king's chamber is built with red granite beams weighing up to 70 tons, brought from Aswan, 500 miles away. Why granite? Granite is full of quartz crystals. Quartz is piezoelectric. When you squeeze quartz, it generates electricity. When you vibrate it, it generates a charge. The king's chamber is designed to resonate at specific frequencies. The sarcophagus, a granite box that is too small for a standard coffin, rings like a bell when struck. Christopher Dunn, an engineer, proposed the theory that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but a power plant, a coupled oscillator. He suggests that the distinct chambers were designed to generate hydrogen gas, and the acoustics were used to excite the gas into a plasma, releasing energy. The skeptic laughs. A power plant made of stone? Where are the wires? Where are the control panels? But look at the design. The air shafts that lead out of the king's and queen's chambers were thought to be for ventilation, but they were sealed. They didn't open to the outside until modern explorers blasted them open. They are narrow, straight, and pointed at specific stars, but they are also waveguides. Modeling shows they are capable of channeling microwave radiation. If the pyramid was a machine, it was a machine that used the Earth itself as a component. It used the seismic vibration of the planet, the background hum of the Earth, and amplified it through the geometry of the limestone and the piezoelectricity of the granite. It was wireless energy in the truest sense. This brings us to the stories of acoustic levitation. In Tibetan folklore, there are accounts of monks using drums and trumpets to lift massive stones up a cliff face. In Egyptian myths, there are stories of priests chanting to make the blocks of the pyramid float into place. We dismiss this as magic, but in modern physics labs, we use acoustic levitation to float water droplets and small polystyrene balls. Sound is pressure. If you can focus enough pressure in a standing wave, you can counteract gravity. The energy required to lift a 70-ton block with sound is immense. But if you understand the resonant frequency of the stone, the specific note that makes the granite vibrate, you might not need brute force. You might only need the key. Maybe the tools we are looking for were not chisels and cranes, but tuning forks and trumpets. Maybe the reason we don't find the cranes is that they didn't use them. They sang the stones into the sky. The mechanical sky. The Antikythera clues. But surely, if they had high technology, they would have left gears. They would have left clockwork. In 1900, sponge divers off the coast of Antikythera, Greece, found a shipwreck. Inside a rotted wooden box was a lump of corroded bronze. It sat in a museum for years, ignored. When it was finally cleaned and x-rayed, the world of archaeology broke. It was a computer, the Antikythera mechanism. It contained at least 30 interlocking bronze gears. It had a differential gear, a mechanism that modern history says wasn't invented until the 16th century. Tracked the sun, the moon, the planets. predicted eclipses decades in advance. It corrected for the irregular orbit of the moon. It is dated to around 100 BC. It is a solitary genius in a world of clay pots. But technology does not exist in a vacuum. You cannot have a differential gear without a lathe to cut it. You cannot have a lathe without high-quality metallurgy. You cannot have the mathematics to design the gear ratios without a deep, institutional understanding of astronomy and calculus. The Antikythera mechanism is not an invention. It is a survivor. It is likely one of thousands that existed, the only one that happened to fall into the preserving silt of the seabed. It implies that the Greco-Roman world had a level of mechanical sophistication that was lost completely for 1500 years. If they had this in 100 BC, what did they have in 1000 BC? Or 5000? The arrow of progress is not a straight line up. It is a jagged sawtooth. We climb, we fall, we forget. We reinvent the wheel literally and metaphorically. There are stories of automatons in the ancient world. The tripods of Hephaestus that moved of their own accord. The mechanical doves of Arcadus. The bronze giant Talos that guarded Crete. We treat these as myths. But the Antikythera mechanism proves that the capability to build complex machines existed. If the Antikythera is the low end of the technology, a pocket calculator for a ship captain, what was the high end? What was the mainframe? Perhaps the high-end technology was not made of bronze. Bronze survives. Silicon does not. Plastic does not. If the ancients had an information age, the physical evidence of their computers would be dust. The only thing that would survive is the analog backup. The bronze gears, the stone temples, the biological legacy, the bloodline of the Watchers. We must return to the biological evidence, but deeper this time. Not just the DNA, but the blood itself. There is a peculiarity in the human blood types. Rhesus negative, Rh negative. Most primates are Rh positive. Most mammals are Rh positive. The Rh protein is a standard evolutionary marker found in the rhesus monkey, hence the name. But about 15% of the human population lacks this protein. They are Rh negative. Here is the biological paradox. If an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive baby, her body rejects the fetus. Her immune system attacks the child as a foreign object, a virus. This is called hemolytic disease of the newborn. Before modern medicine, this resulted in a high rate of miscarriage and stillbirth. Evolution selects against traits that kill offspring. Nature does not typically design a mother to be allergic to her own child. The persistence of the Rh negative gene is an anomaly. It suggests a mixing of two lineages that were not entirely compatible. Some theorists, leaning into the edge of the Silurian thought process, suggest this is evidence of a hybridization event in the deep past. A moment where human stock was bred with something else, something that didn't carry the primate Rh marker. Who were they else? The Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven came. They speak of genetic engineering, of creating a worker race to mine the gold. They speak of the Adamu. We read these tablets as religious allegory, but the Sumerians were obsessed with detail. They recorded grain shipments, beer recipes, and legal contracts with the same clay. Why would they switch to fantasy when writing their history? They described the gods not as magical spirits, but as biological entities. They ate, they slept, they fought, they made mistakes. They needed gold. If a prior civilization, perhaps a terrestrial one that had separated from the main hominid branch millions of years ago, or a colony from elsewhere needed labor, they might have tweaked the local fauna. They might have taken the Homo erectus and spliced in the code for high intelligence, for language, for dexterity. The Rh negative blood might be the scar of that surgery. a genetic incompatibility left over from a forced merger. And where is this blood type most common? Among the Basques of Spain and France, a people whose language is unrelated to any other on Earth, a language isolate that seems to predate the Indo-European migration. It is high among the Berbers of North Africa. It is high in the pockets of the world where the megalithic builders lived. The final revelation, the moon's watchful eye. As we reach the zenith of this investigation, we must look up. The moon is the companion of the Earth, the silent witness. But is it just a rock? The moon is a statistical anomaly. It is too big for a planet of our size. Its orbit is perfectly circular, unlike the elliptical orbits of other satellites. It is tidally locked, showing only one face. And, most chillingly, it is at precisely the right distance and size to create a perfect solar eclipse. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon, and the moon is 400 times closer. They appear exactly the same size in the sky. Astronomers call this a cosmic coincidence. The odds are astronomical, but there is more. The density of the moon is much lower than the density of the Earth. It rings like a bell. When the Apollo 12 lunar module was jettisoned and crashed onto the surface, the moon vibrated for over an hour. This suggests it is not a solid rock, but perhaps honeycombed or fractured or hollow. In the 1970s, two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, published a theory: is the moon the creation of alien intelligence? They argued that the moon might be a hollowed-out asteroid, towed into orbit eons ago to act as a stabilizer for the Earth's axis, to create the tides that encourage life, and to serve as a base of operations. If the Silurian hypothesis holds, if a high-tech civilization existed here millions of years ago, space travel would be their escape valve. If they saw the cataclysm coming, if they saw the sun warming or the ice moving, they would look to the moon. Maybe they didn't go to the stars. Maybe they just went next door. The craters on the moon are shallow. Even the biggest impacts do not penetrate deeply, suggesting a hard, metallic shell beneath the dust. The concentrations of mass mascons beneath the lunar Maria distort the orbits of our satellites. If the moon is an artifact, or if it houses the remnants of a prior age, it explains the silence. They are not broadcasting radio waves because they are not there anymore, or they are in cryostasis, or they are computerized. The moon might be the black box of the Earth, the flight recorder waiting to be recovered after the crash. Closing the circle, the Ouroboros. We have traveled from the microscopic coils of the Urals to the sunken pyramids of Cuba, from the radioactive glass of Libya to the genetic anomalies in our own blood, and finally to the silent, ringing body of the moon. The picture that emerges is not one of linear progress. It is a picture of a snake eating its own tail. The Ouroboros. Civilization is not a destination. It is a season. Comes, it blooms, it withers, and it dies. The winter follows, and in the winter, the ice grinds the cities to dust. The ocean rises to wash the slate clean. We are currently in the height of summer. We are blooming. We are loud, bright, and arrogant. We think we are the first. We think we are the last. But the ghosts of the past are all around us. They are in the coal we burn, perhaps the fossilized remains of their forests or their biotechnology. They are in the geometry of the continental shelves. They are in the nightmares of the great flood that haunt every culture on Earth. We are walking through a museum with the lights turned off. We bump into shapes we don't understand. The Great Pyramid, the Bimini Road, the Bygong pipes, and we call them religious ritual or geological oddity, because we are afraid to turn on the flashlight. Because if we turn on the light, we might see that the museum is actually a graveyard, and we are standing in the next open grave. The question is not, did they exist? The evidence, when stacked, screams yes. The question is, why did they fail? Did they burn too hot? Did they use up the easy energy? Did they turn on each other? Or is the Earth simply a trap? A cradle that is too comfortable to leave, but too volatile to stay in? The warning from the deep time is clear. Intelligence is fragile. Planet is violent. If we want to be the exception, if we want to break the cycle of the Great Filter, we must stop acting like the masters of the Earth and start acting like its students. We need to learn from the silence. We need to read the warnings in the isotopes. We need to respect the ocean that swallowed our ancestors. Because the wind is picking up. The climate is shifting. The carbon is spiking. The cycle is turning. The shadow of the Silurian is stretching out to meet us. And this time, there might not be anyone left to write the maps for the next generation. This is the story of the Earth. Not our Earth, just Earth. The planet that shakes us off like fleas when we bite too hard. Listen to the wind. Listen to the hum of the granite. Look at the moon. You are not alone in time. You never were. The tragedy of the human condition is not that we are mortal. It is that we are amnesiacs. We wake up in a ruined mansion, surrounded by the debris of a party we do not remember attending. We find half-eaten meals, broken glass, and strange machinery humming in the basement, and we convince ourselves that we built the house this morning. This is the psychological barrier that prevents us from accepting the evidence of the forgotten Earth. To admit that we are not the first is to admit that we are not special. It is to admit that we are vulnerable. It shatters the Victorian illusion of progress, the comforting lie that history is a straight line leading upward to us, the pinnacle of creation. But the geology is a circle. It is a wheel that grinds civilizations into dust and then uses that dust to grow the next garden. We must consider the concept of the cargo cult. During the Second World War, islanders in the Pacific saw American planes land, bringing supplies, food, and technology. When the war ended and the soldiers left, the islanders built mock airplanes out of bamboo and straw. They marched in formation. They carved wooden headphones. They were trying to summon the gods back by mimicking their technology. Look at the Egyptian dynastic period. Look at the way they revered the Sphinx, a monument they likely did not build but inherited. Look at the way they repaired the old kingdom structures with inferior mud bricks. Were the pharaohs the masters of the stone, or were they the cargo cult living in the ruins of the pre-flood world? Were they mimicking a technology they no longer understood, turning power plants into tombs and astronomical computers into religious idols? This perspective shifts the timeline of innovation. It suggests that the primitive ancients were actually the post-apocalyptic survivors of a high ancestry. They were not inventing, they were remembering. The sudden appearance of agriculture, mathematics, and writing in Sumeria and the Indus Valley was not a spark from nothing. It was a rebooting of a corrupted hard drive, the inheritance of dust. We look forward now. We cast our minds into the deep future to understand the deep past. This is the exercise of the future geologist. Imagine an intelligence evolving on Earth 60 million years from today. The human race is long gone. Perhaps we left for the stars, or perhaps we choked on our own carbon. The ice sheets have returned and retreated 20 times. The continents have drifted. The Atlantic is wider. Africa has smashed into Europe, closing the Mediterranean. What do they find of the 21st century? They will not find the internet. The servers will have rusted into iron oxide dust. They will not find our books. Cellulose rots. They will not find our digital photos. They will find the technosphere, a layer of anomalous stratification. They will find a layer of plastiglomerate rocks fused with melted polymers. They will find a concentration of rare earth elements, lanthanum, neodymium, terbium, that does not occur naturally. This will be the fossilized remains of our smartphones and electric car batteries, scattered like seeds across the landfills of the world. They will find the chicken bone layer. We consume 60 billion chickens a year. Their bones are fossilizing in landfills globally. It will be the defining biological marker of our time. And they will find the radiation. The decay of uranium-235 and plutonium-239 will leave a signature that screams artificial fission. This future geologist, waving a sensor over a layer of compressed shale that used to be New York City, will ask the same questions we are asking today. Was this nature? Was this a weird volcanic event that concentrated rare metals? Or was someone here? And the skeptics of that future time will say, no, it is impossible. Evolution takes time. We are the first ones to split the atom. They will be wrong, just as we are likely wrong. This thought experiment forces us to confront the great silence. If the universe is 13 billion years old, and Earth is 4.5 billion years old, the window of civilization is a blink. If a civilization lasts for 10,000 years, that is 1/500% of Earth's history. You could fit 500 civilizations into the timeline of the Earth, spaced out by mass extinctions, and they would never touch. They would never know each other. They would be ships passing in the night of geological time. The final synthesis, the terrestrial hypothesis. We have looked at the possibility of ancient aliens. We have looked at the possibility of time travelers. But the most grounded, the most scientifically robust, and the most haunting explanation is the terrestrial hypothesis. We are homegrown, and so were they. The Earth is a biochemical reactor capable of producing intelligence repeatedly. It is a feature of the system, not a bug. Just as the planet produces hurricanes when the heat is high, it produces minds when the complexity is high. But intelligence is a self-limiting phenomenon. It is a fire that consumes its fuel source. The Silurian civilizations, be they reptilian, amphibian, or early hominid, likely hit the same walls we are hitting. Energy density, waste heat, ecological collapse. Maybe they solved it. Maybe they transcended the physical and moved into a digital substrate, leaving the physical world to rot. Or maybe they failed. Maybe they pressed the button. The glass in the Libyan desert suggests they might have pressed the button. The unifying theory is that Earth is a school, a harsh, violent school, and we are the current class. We are sitting at desks carved by the students who came before us. We are writing on a chalkboard that has been erased 1,000 times. But if you look closely, you can still see the faint, chalky ghost lines of the previous equations. The equations are the same. E uguale mc al quadrato. F uguale ma. The laws of thermodynamics do not change. The previous students tried to solve the problem of sustainable high-energy civilization. The evidence suggests they failed. The silence suggests they failed. The so what? The responsibility of memory. So why does this matter? Why should you, sitting in the comfort of the Holocene, care about a reptilian industrialist from the Eocene or a maritime king from the Ice Age? Because we are repeating the pattern. We are burning the carbon. We are melting the ice. We are acidifying the oceans. We are engaging in the exact same behaviors that create the anomalies we find in the rock record. If we acknowledge the forgotten Earth, we acknowledge that we are not immune to extinction. Cures us of our arrogance. It tells us that high technology is not a shield against deep time. The pyramids of Giza are eroding. The Hoover Dam will eventually crumble. The Apollo landing sites will be dusted over by micrometeorites. Entropy wins, always, but there is a way to cheat the cycle. It is not through stone. It is not through steel. It is through wisdom. If we can accept that we are part of a lineage of minds, we can stop trying to conquer the earth and start trying to partner with it. We can look at the sudden spikes in temperature from 50 million years ago and say, that was a mistake. Let's not do that. We can look at the vitrified glass and say, that was a war. Let's not fight it. We are the first species with the capacity to do archaeology on a planetary scale. We are the first to look down into the strata and see the mirror staring back. This gives us a choice. We can continue to be the fire makers, burning brightly and briefly, leaving a layer of ash for the next rats to find. Or we can become the gardeners. We can design a civilization that integrates with the geology, rather than fighting it. We can build with biology. We can stabilize the climate. We can encode our knowledge in the genome, in the very life of the planet, so that even if we fall, the wisdom survives. The end of the documentary. The sun sets over the badlands of the American West. The shadows stretch long over the layers of striated rock, red, orange, purple. Each band of color is an era. There is the band of the dinosaurs. There is the band of the great dying. There is the band of the tropical ocean. And at the very top, a thin, fragile layer of dust. That is us. It is so thin the wind could blow it away. We are walking on the bones of giants. We are breathing the air that was exhaled by trilobites, dinosaurs, and things that have no name. The water in your glass has been drunk by 1 billion creatures before you. The iron in your blood was forged in the heart of a collapsing star and mined by a civilization that died before the first shark swam. We are the inheritors of a magnificent, terrifying mystery. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. And the earth has a long memory even if we do not. The next time you pick up a stone on the beach, look at it. Really look at it. Is it a stone? Or is it a brick from a cathedral that stood for 10,000 years, worn smooth by the patience of the sea? Is the hum you hear in the quiet places just the wind? Or is it the echo of a machine that is still running, deep beneath our feet, waiting for us to remember how to turn it off? The story of the earth is not finished. The page is turning. The pen is in our hand. But the ink is running out. Write well, because the next reader is already waiting in the wings, and they will judge us by what we leave behind in the rock. The silence returns to the Narada River. The ice reforms over the bygone pipes. The sand covers the glass of Libya. The ghosts recede, waiting for the next cycle. We are here, for now.